Coming up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon, prosecutors indict 15 crew members of the capsized Sewol-ho ferry. 4 of them, including the captain, have been charged with negligent homicide. Politicians running in the June 4th local elections begin registering their candidacy today. 13 days of official campaigning will start next Thursday. Plus, a jury in the U.S. orders Hyundai Motor to pay almost $250 million in punitive damages over a manufacturing defect that it said led to a deadly car accident. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's noon Thursday, May 15th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in live from Seoul. I'm Ju.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. We start with the latest on the criminal investigation into the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. Prosecutors have upped the stakes against the crew who abandoned the sinking ferry and its hundreds of passengers.
They have indicted 15 people on charges of negligence of duty, while the vessel's captain and 3 others are charged with homicide. Our Kwon Soa has this report.
State prosecutors on Thursday indicted the captain Lee Joon-seok and 3 other crew members on charges of homicide and negligence of duty for fleeing the sinking Sewol-ho ferry and abandoning hundreds of passengers on board. If found guilty, they face a maximum death penalty. At the Gwangju Disctric Court in the south of the country, the prosecutors also indicted 11 others for negligence of duty and other crimes. The crew were among the first to be rescued, while Korea's maritime law stipulates that they should be the last to leave the ship. They are also accused of changing out of their uniforms, making it difficult for the Coast Guards to treat them differently from passengers. Furthermore, they repeatedly made announcements that passengers remain in their compartments even as they abandoned the vessel. Meanwhile, prosecutors are looking into putting more pressure on Yoo Dae-gyun, the first son of the practical owner of the Sewol-ho ferry, Yoo Byung-on. They put him on their Class A most wanted list on Wednesday, 1 day after raiding his house, which means he will be arrested on the spot once he is found. There are concerns he may attempt to flee the country if he already hasn't. Prosecutors have summoned his father, Yoo Byung-on, for questioning on Friday, and they say they expect him to appear. Kwon Soa, Arirang News.
Today is Teachers' Day here in Korea, a day for students and graduates to show their respect and gratitude to their teachers. Normally, the day is filled with festive events, but this year it won't be celebrated in quite the same way, as our Song Ji-sun tells us.
They serve as our instructors, confidants, and counselors, and are in some cases as important as a parent, because a good teacher can change our lives. In honor of them, over 100 countries celebrate Teachers' Day. About a fifth of them do so on World Teachers' Day on October 5th. But here in Korea, it's celebrated on May 15th, the birthday of King Sejong, who invented the Korean alphabet. Teachers' Day was started over 5 decades ago by young members of Korea's Red Cross who volunteered to visit their teachers who are retired or had fallen ill. More than 50 years later, students today give carnations to their teachers in the same way they give them to their parents 1 week earlier. It's a less than subtle nod to the importance of the teachers and the roles they play.
The ways of celebrating Teachers' Day have evolved over the years. Students sometimes wash their teachers' feet, cook them food, and bring the food to their teachers' homes.
But this year's Teachers' Day will not be celebrated like the years gone by. There'll be no celebratory events as a mark of respect to the victims of Sewol-ho ferry disaster. For the first time, all commemorative events have been canceled, and the week has been designated as a week for mourning. In light of the disaster, the Education Ministry has banned mass school field trips until at least June, and the teachers are calling for proactive steps to ensure the safety of students nationwide.
We urge the government to step up safety training for the students and also to better train the teachers so they are all capable of handling emergency situations.
Some schools have scheduled special safety sessions for students on this Teachers' Day, while others have organized visits to a memorial altar in Ansan that has been set up for the ferry disaster victims. 송지선, Arirang News.
Senior diplomats from Korea and Japan will begin a second round of talks later today afternoon on Japan's wartime sexual enslavement. Seoul's foreign ministry says they'll focus on proving the so-called comfort women were forced into sexual servitude and were not, as some in Japan claim, working as prostitutes. Not much progress was made at their first meeting in Seoul last month. The Korean government intends to use letters released by the Chinese government in March that prove the women were forced to work in Japanese military brothels. More than 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve Japanese troops in the early 20th century. Tokyo claims the issue was settled through a 1965 treaty when the two countries normalized diplomatic ties. Now, there are concerns Japan might want to focus more on other issues during today's talks, like Korea's import restrictions on Japanese fisheries or Tokyo's moves to boost its military presence.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will lay out his official stance on Japan's push for the right to collective self-defense later this afternoon. Local media reports that Abe will hold a press conference after receiving a report on the issue today. The Japanese leader is expected to lay out specific scenarios under which collective self-defense can be exercised, which include a neighboring country coming under attack. There's speculation Japan may include the scenario of a war on the Korean peninsula. South Korea's foreign ministry has stressed Seoul needs to give its explicit consent when it comes to any and all contingencies on the peninsula. Now, in a little under 3 weeks' time, Koreans will head to the polls to cast their ballots in the June 4th local elections. Campaigning is about to kick into high gear, but this election, unlike ones in years gone by, will be far less spirited as the nation continues to mourn the hundreds of people who so tragically lost their lives in the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. Ji Myung-gil reports.
The ruling Saenuri Party's Election Management Committee held its first meeting on Thursday to discuss its strategy for the upcoming local elections. The committee's chairman Lee Gwangju said campaigns under the Saenuri Party banner will be toned down this year in light of the Sewol-ho ferry tragedy.
The whole election process will focus on reinforcing the country's safety measures. Our election management committee will devise plans to help the families of Sewol-ho ferry disaster victims. Election campaigns will be carried out in the most humble way possible.
Candidates in the local races are registering this Thursday and Friday. The incumbent mayor of Incheon, Song Young-gil of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, was one of the first to show up at the National Election Commission headquarters in Incheon on Thursday morning to make his candidacy official. Saenuri lawmaker Nam Kyung-pil resigned from his seat on Thursday and announced he was running for the governorship of Gyeonggi-do Province. All the candidates will be allowed to start campaigning next Thursday on May 22nd. For the first time in Korean local election history, people will be able to cast their ballots before voting day on June 4th. Early voting will be held on May 30th and the 31st. The outcome of the nationwide election is being regarded as a litmus test for the Park Geun-hye administration, which entered its second year in February. We will have to wait for the results on election day to see which political party earns the trust of the people to institute change. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on NEWSLINE at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about 11.
Korea's automakers and the auto industry in general enjoyed a bumper month in April. Double-digit growth was seen in all production, domestic sales, and exports. Arirang News' Park Ji-won has the details.
Korea's auto industry fared very well last month in all areas: production, domestic sales, and exports. According to figures released by the Trade Ministry Thursday, Korea's auto industry logged double-digit growth across the board in April compared to the same month last year. Vehicle exports in particular hit a record high in April, coming in at over $4.8 billion. Exports of auto parts reached the second highest ever monthly amount at $2.34 billion. Breaking down the figures by automaker, Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors, which shipped nearly 80% of all vehicles last month, posted double-digit growth on year. Popularity of Hyundai's small and mid-sized models, such as Accent and Avante, and the increasing popularity of Kia's new K3 played a big part in the staunch growth. Normalized operations at Hyundai and Kia's assembling factories in Korea also attributed to the on-year growth. Auto sales in Korea saw an over 11% on-year increase in April. More than 147,000 units were sold domestically. Of the total, over 130,000 were Korean cars, and they were mainly mid-sized cars and sports utility vehicles. It marks the first time in 16 months that Korean automakers have sold more than 130,000 units in Korea in a single month. Production was in full swing as well. Over 433,000 cars were manufactured in Korea in April, up more than 12% on year. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
A jury in the United States has ordered Korean auto giant Hyundai Motor to pay damages of well over $200 million after finding that a defect in one of its cars caused a head-on smash that killed 2 teenagers in 2011. But Hyundai says it will appeal. Our Connie Kim reports.
A jury in the U.S. state of Montana has ordered Hyundai Motor to pay a staggering $248 million in punitive damages over a manufacturing defect in a Hyundai vehicle that caused a deadly car accident 3 years ago. The jury also ordered that of the total, Hyundai pay $8.6 million in damages to the families of the 2 teenagers that died in the July 2011 crash. The verdict says a defective steering knuckle in the Hyundai Tiburon caused it to suddenly veer into an oncoming lane, where it crashed head-on with another automobile. The maximum cap for steering knuckle defects stands at $10 million, but a judge in the state ruled the amount is not high enough to deter future wrongdoings by super-wealthy multinational firms. In 2005, Hyundai Motor recalled 111 Tiburons manufactured over a 1-month period that year due to steering issues, but it's unclear if the Hyundai model involved in the 2011 crash had been made during that time. Hyundai Motor has called the damage award outrageous and says it will appeal. It argues that a firecracker set off inside the vehicle might have caused the crash. Eyewitnesses say they saw a firework explode in the car prior to the accident, but police say they found no evidence to suggest the explosion. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
A U.S. court has thrown out an appeal by Samsung Electronics to revise a patent ruling that was handed down in Apple's favor. The United States Court of Appeals said Wednesday that it agreed with the U.S.-based International Trade Commission's ruling last June, which said Apple did not infringe on 3 of Samsung's patents. The court did not elaborate on its reasoning. The ITC had ruled that Apple infringed on 1 of Samsung's patents, which was not ruled upon on Wednesday. Apple devices with the technology were subject to import bans, but this was overturned by the White House last August. The Obama administration claimed the technology was covered by the so-called Standard Essential patent. This ensures devices made by different companies communicate reasonably well with each other. Now, leading U.S. banking institution J.P. Morgan Chase expects the U.S. economy to grow by 3% in the latter half of the year at a seminar hosted by the Korean Chamber of Commerce and Industry in New Jersey on Wednesday. The firm's senior economist Robert Melman gave the outlook, saying the US economy has come out of recession now and is expanding at a moderate pace. He, however, said America's real GDP growth for the first half will likely be 1.6% due to the effects of the extreme cold snap this past winter. Time now for a look through our international headlines. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the News Center.
Eunice, the death toll on the Turkey mining accident has skyrocketed over the past 24 hours, making it the deadliest one in the country's history.
That's right, Gwangju. Turkey is no stranger to mining accidents, unfortunately, but this one is really bringing the people's anger to the surface, as more than 270 are now confirmed to have died. And that anger is being aimed squarely at the government. Our Shin Se-min reports.
The death toll from the mining accident in Turkey has topped 270 and looks sure to rise even further. As rescue efforts continue, the Turkish government is facing nationwide protests over its failure to improve mine safety. There are reports of clashes near the accident site in Soma as well as in Istanbul and Ankara. According to the mine operator, nearly 450 workers have been rescued. The government says otherwise, however, putting the number of rescued at some 360. Officials say about 120 workers remain trapped in the mine some 2 kilometers underground. Fresh air is continuously being pumped into the shattered mine to give those trapped the best chance to get out with their lives. All power has been cut to the mine system of service cages as an electrical spark triggered the explosion. What started out as a massive rescue operation has steadily turned into a recovery of the dead, though, as no survivors have surfaced since early Wednesday. Many Turks are furious with Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan's government for privatizing the nation's mines and ignoring countless safety warnings. The disaster has outraged the public to a point that Turkey's major trade unions have announced a one-day strike in protest. Prime Minister Erdogan said Wednesday that Turkey was experiencing a very great pain over the accident, but stressed that similar explosions occur in mines around the world. This disaster is shaping up to be the worst mining accident in Turkey since 1992, when 263 people were killed in a gas explosion. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Anti-Chinese protests in Vietnam are becoming increasingly violent as demonstrators have indiscriminately set factories on fire owned by Chinese as well as Koreans, Taiwanese, and Japanese people. Korea's Donga-ilbo newspaper reports 6 Koreans were hurt during a riot in an industrial park in Gwangju province near Ho Chi Minh City, adding that some 50 Korean-owned properties so far have suffered damage. Local police say they've detained close to 500 people for questioning related to that Gwangju protest. Hong Kong has issued a travel warning to Vietnam, and Beijing's foreign ministry also has urged its citizens to take precautions. Singapore has called on Hanoi's ambassador to raise its concerns. The protests were sparked after a Chinese oil rig was placed in disputed waters of the South China Sea. Nigeria's President Goodluck Jonathan says there will be no swap deal with Boko Haram, the Islamist militant group that kidnapped more than 200 schoolgirls from their Chibok boarding school. This according to visiting British Minister for Africa Mark Simmons, who met with Jonathan Wednesday. He said Nigeria's president made it very clear there would be no negotiations involving detained Boko Haram militants, but that dialogue should continue to reach a solution that brings stability to northern Nigeria. Previously, the Nigerian cabinet minister had said Abuja was willing to talk with Boko Haram without specifying whether that might include an exchange for the abducted girls. The World Health Organization has concluded the spread of the potentially lethal Middle East respiratory syndrome is of serious concern, but does not constitute a global health emergency at this point. The virus causes coughing, fever, shortness of breath, and could lead to respiratory or organ failure. The WHO says there's no evidence so far of human-to-human transmission, though contact with camels in the spring could have contributed to the surge in new cases. The virus has been confirmed in more than 500 patients, most of them in Saudi Arabia, with a handful of cases from Asia, Europe, and the U.S. 171 people are known to have died from the syndrome so far. And Japan is moving closer to releasing groundwater from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant into the Pacific Ocean. Plant operator Tokyo Electric Power Corporation says its analyses, together with those of other agencies, have found radiation levels to be below safety requirements for cesium-137 and tritium in the groundwater. It said it will move forward with the release after explaining their analyses to the local government and fisheries associations. Japan's broadcaster NHK reports that could be as early as the 21st or next Wednesday. Relatedly, U.S. Ambassador to Japan Caroline Kennedy visited the nuclear plant on Wednesday and pledged continued U.S. support for the Fukushima cleanup.
Well, thank you very much, Eunice, for the international news there. Now, on a much lighter note, the stars are out in force in the south of France for the 67th Cannes Film Festival, which is very exciting. But if you're hoping for a Korean film, you might be waiting a while, maybe another 12 months.
Right. This is because none are in competition this year, raising questions about whether Korean films are losing some of their luster. Sun Jung-in explains.
For the second year in a row, there will be no Korean movie in competition at the Cannes Film Festival. It's a disappointing turn of events as Korea had films competing in almost every other year dating back to 1998. Since Im Kwon-taek won Best Director at Cannes in 2000 for his film Chunhyang, movie directors have used the festival as a springboard onto the international stage, including Park Chan-wook, Hong Sang-soo, and Im Sang-soo. Some movie critics blame commercialism for the recent drought.
Movies that are planned as art films become commercialized when big companies get involved, and I think that may have had an effect.
Other critics argue that it's too early to undervalue Korean movies just because of their recent failure to enter the competition. They point to actress Chun Do-yeon being named a jury member at the festival as proof.
It is promising that Chun Do-yeon was selected as a panel member for the movie festival, following in the footsteps of directors Shin Sang-ok and Lee Chang-dong. It is the equivalent to 3 or 4 Korean movies competing at the festival.
Korean films weren't completely shut out of this year's festival. 4 Korean films, including A Girl at My Door, Target, and A Hard Day, have been invited to be screened in a separate non-competition category. It represents a big opportunity for the film's directors. And although Korea is out of the competition this year, local critics are hopeful that next year's festival will be different. This year's version runs through May 25th. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. I'm Lee Ji-hyun with your latest weather updates. The on and off morning rain has let up in most areas and the skies are turning brighter. In fact, the whole nation can expect dazzling sunshine this afternoon. And summer-like conditions will continue in the southern provinces with highs hovering in the mid to upper 20s, while Seoul and the surrounding areas will notice a cooler highs today in the seasonal averages. But temperatures will rebound nicely into the mid 20s again tomorrow, and warm and sunny conditions are ahead of us for a while. But over in Jindo, the winds and waves should remain calm, but the currents in the water will be strong as the spring tide period starts. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The high in Seoul will rise to 23, while Daegu will peak at 27, and Gwangju and Busan both should climb to 25. Now for other regions, it looks like down on Jeju and Daejeon will reach 20 and 25 later in the day. Dokdo should see a high of 22, while Mount Keungang tops out at 13. Well, that's all for me today, but I'll be back with more updates tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much, Jion, for the weather there, and those are the news stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Thank you for watching.